Professor Exen Iraki is an economics analyst. He's a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Good to have you on the show again, Prof.
Long time.
You haven't been here this year?
I haven't been here. I was here before COVID.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, he was
Yes,
before
yes.
COVID, and then we saw you virtually.
I survived the COVID, and I will survive Ukraine.
And whatever else they bring.
And from that, I have a feeling I will live a long life.
That's a good point to
And I
start.
hope you join me.
We will be
Indeed.
there.
But I'm worried about the budget.
The budget.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about today. The CS will be in Parliament tomorrow. The headline in the Standard today is Painful Budget. President signs Division of Revenue Bill, which now outlines how the money is going to be shared between the national and county governments, if at all is going to be shared. And now that move paves way for the CS to read the budget speech in Parliament tomorrow. Remember, the court said you cannot read budget before you have passed the Division of Revenue Bill. Come on, what are you talking about? So now we are in steps. And the first issue is for the president. This is President Kenyatta's last budget, and he needs enough revenue to complete his legacy projects, but he also needs to pay debts and manage the high cost of living. 2 counties. National government owes counties 148 billion shillings for the current financial year, leaving them in awkward financial positions even as the next budget is unveiled. For Parliament, MPs seeking re-election will have difficulties approving the budget if it raises the cost of living. Taxes will have to be hidden because the Treasury has to raise 2.1 billion shillings in taxes. The Treasury, Ukuri Yatani, has to strike a delicate balance between raising an extra 300 billion shillings and ensuring cost of goods remains manageable in an election year. And finally, for the Kenyans, taxpayers would want lower taxes but more spending on development, not just civil service salaries. They also want the government to spend less on debt. All those things, all of them sound like just lofty dreams for everybody.
It seems from the way you have read the demands of the budget, seems that budget should be implemented by a magician, not an economist. There's so much being demanded by the voters, by the politicians. And the president has to think about the budget, not the budget, but elections in August. And since we are near when we are going to the polls, you must not annoy the voters. But the circumstances seem to be that you must annoy them in some way, because you must fund certain projects. And that money must come from either debt, which they don't like, or from more taxes, which they don't like. How do you balance that? I don't envy politicians anymore.
But then, if you think about it, the president does not have anything to do with this budget. I mean, in terms of, he is not going to be the one to implement these budgets. The financial year begins in July. The president is out of office by the end of August. So
that's what makes the budget more exciting. In fact, one of the things I'm most interested about the budget when it is read on Thursday, and I will be very keen, is to find out what are some of the policies and dreams of the 2 presidential contenders are going to be the budget. Are we going to find bottom-up economics there? Are we going to find the 6,000 promised to Kenyans there? And I see the budget on Thursday as a political statement. It will give us a direction on which direction the wind is blowing, the political wind is blowing. So I'm looking forward to it. But the issue of the debt, the issue of the cost of living, the issue of subsidies, the issue of what is happening in Ukraine, expect a lot in that budget. I want to see how they are going to be addressed.
Can we do, if we're able to see generally, because this trepidation was felt last year, the same thing that we're seeing without these elements that we are discussing today, subsidies, the war in Ukraine, etc., high cost of living having maybe doubled. This same fear was felt before the reading of the budget last year. How then has the performance been in terms of keeping the lines tight between last year when we had, what was it? What was the amount of the budget last year? 3.6 trillion shillings. And then performance to date in this fiscal year. How would you say the performance has been year on year between 2021 and 2022?
Let's give credit where it is due. I think between last year and now, the economy has recovered. I think last year the economic growth was almost zero. This year we expected to hit about 5 to 6%, riding on post-COVID recovery. Kenyans listened and went for mass vaccination. We got a vaccine for COVID-19, and that gave us an impression the economy is recovering, that things are going back to normal. And that is why the inflation has gone up, because people are demanding goods and services. And when the demand for goods and services goes up, inflation goes up. So I think for all intention and purposes, we have done better than expected. The problem is that not much has changed in the last 1 year. We haven't got excess revenue to cover the cost of paying salaries, the cost of paying debts. We haven't recovered that much. So that's why things are almost the same compared last year, as if you compare last year and this year. And that is the dilemma of the finance minister and the president and other policymakers. How do we move from where we are? Ukraine was not there, it is there.
Yep.
So we are recovering from COVID-19, another crisis comes. So it needs a lot of political brinkmanship, a lot of economic analysis. But that's why we voted these ladies and gentlemen to lead us in times of crisis, not just when things are good.
Yeah. You mentioned that it would require the stuff of Houdini and other magicians to be able to have...
But not Vundu.
to have this done in terms of seeing a budget that with all these demands. Why do you say that, Prof?
If you look at the current political situation in this country, economic situation in the country, we have two sides of the budget. We have the revenue and we have the cost. The revenue has not gone up substantially the last 1 year. Why? Because you need to deepen the tax that Kenyans get. I know KRI has done quite well in releasing more taxes, but not substantially. So if you want things to change as compared with last year, then you must raise more taxes. You must get more money from debt or from donors. That has not happened. But the demands have gone up because people are saying we want the cost of living to go down. And one interesting way of bringing the costs of living down, which I don't support, is giving people subsidies. The oil marketers are demanding subsidies. The fertilizer farmers are demanding subsidies. So the revenue side has not gone up, but the demand side has gone up. And that's why I'm saying you need a magician. Because where are we going to get money to fund all these demands? The counties are demanding their money. So it needs a lot of balancing act. And that's why somebody was very right to say that you might have to hide some things. Take from this hard, take from that hard. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that budget on Thursday to see how that balancing is coming out.
Prof, you said that we have performed well, and this was in response to Undu's question of how the 3.6 trillion shillings has been spent in this current financial year. When you say we have performed well, what exactly are you talking about? Not looking at, okay, so there's been economic growth, but has money gone into the proper allocation? Has this 3.6 trillion shillings been spent properly?
I think that's a very good question, particularly when you ask that question very in the morning, in the middle, at the start of the month. When I say that the economy is doing well, is a broader question. I'm looking at it from the top as a bird's eye. That as an economist, I see the economy has done well because GDP has improved. But I think you are right in asking, has that money flowed to our pockets? Am I feeling that my pocket has more money? Because that's the ultimate test of Wanjiko and people on the streets. So by saying that the economy has done very well, it does not mean that everybody has done very well. In fact, when you talk to the people on the streets, they will tell you there's no money. And that's not surprising because you remember we are recovering from COVID. And a lot of businesses had collapsed. A lot of people had lost their jobs. So I'm simply saying we are doing well because we are doing very badly. If you had no money in your pocket and you get one sharing, it's significant.
Yeah, so a big improvement.
Yes, that's my argument. It's not that we have done as well as expected. No, we are not done as well as expected. It's not that we are coming from a hole. So when we start seeing the right out of the hole, we think we have done well.
What are the contributory factors to this poor performance? Because I remember a time where you say, okay, well, you've not done well, right? Even if it was in school, and you get your report card and you say, okay, a couple of C's here, some D's, you could do better, maybe one B. But one of the fundamental things that they looked at then was, what caused this bad performance? And then what can we do to improve so that come around the next grading cycle and we see another report card, perhaps we can have some more B's there and a few more A's and a few A's. So what would you say then are the indicators of this poor performance that then ought to be looked at to then do better?
You give me an impression that you must have been a very good student. And next time I come to this studio, I will demand I see your report form. Remember, I'm a teacher, so I'd like to see that report form. That might give me an impression why you are either very good in the studio or very bad in the studio. But that apart, I think one of the contributing factors why we have not done as good as expected, they are both internal and external factors. One of the internal factors is that nobody wants to say it, but it's a fact that we have not handled the problem of corruption very well. So a lot of money has been getting lost, as we see in the headlines. Corruption has not been tamed. And that means that people who work hard every day in this country are discouraged. So they are not as productive as expected. Because if corruption was tamed and people work and go beyond the call of duty, then we'd have people being more productive. We'd have more revenue being generated and taxes would go up. That's one way to look at it. Number two, I think we have not improved the working environment as much as expected. Now, when we think about the working environment or the so-called economic environment, think of things like highways. Highways have improved substantially. But productivity is not just about highways. We need to improve the working relationship. For example, the regulations. People complain that sometimes our regulations are not very friendly to business. A very good example is you go talk to a businessman, he'll tell you that I have 10 licenses to look at. Why can't we have one license? Why can't we make it as easy as possible to do business? So those are the two internal issues that I see are stopping us from doing as well as expected. And of course, the third one, which might surprise you, is that Kenyans have become very pessimistic. Every place you look around is something bad, something that is annoying. And optimism is very important in economic growth. So we need more good news so that our children don't see negative headlines every day. And of course, we have the external environment, which we have no control over. The war in Ukraine interrupted supply chains and at the same time raised the price of oil. Oil is very important ingredient in economic productivity, transport, logistics, the generation of power, and so on. So if you combine those internal things and external things, you can see the poor performance.
War in Ukraine is very recent thing. I mean, the effect of the war in Ukraine has been felt in March. But we're talking about a financial year that began in July.
But remember that before war in Ukraine came, we had COVID. So war in Ukraine came to make us a bad situation worse. That's why I'm saying the internal factors and external factors. Both have combined to make us feel that life is not very good economically.
Then there is an issue that you mentioned, which you said you are vehemently opposed to the issue of subsidies. Why so?
Now, I'll give you my economic answer. Because when you give people subsidies, you are telling them that you don't need to work very hard. And subsidies are a very simple concept. I don't know whether you remember a very famous musician called Tracy Chapman. Some of you look as if your most popular musician is Tupac Shakur, but that's for another day. And I remember Tracy Chapman singing a song. I don't know whether you want me to sing for you.
Just sing it.
Give me subsidy, life is hard. Subsidies are usually given to people who are the lower echelons of the society, people who cannot make ends meet. That can be in terms of food or in terms of housing. But here we are giving subsidies to people who can make ends meet. For example, the oil market are not poor people, so why are you giving them subsidies? And subsidies also distort the economics. For example, if oil is costing 150 shillings and we are buying it at 130 shillings, we pay the oil marketers 20 shillings as a subsidy because they are selling at a cost. Good economics, because you might argue that the economy will do well because the price of oil is down. But somebody is paying that subsidy. And that is me and you. And that is why I'm against subsidies, because some people benefit, others lose. So my argument has always, don't use subsidies. Let the market give us prices.
But
And
isn't there a different argument though?
And who told you that the price of oil would be higher if we did not have subsidies? They probably would be lower.
Are we misapplying the term subsidy when it comes to this petroleum one? Because this is not a subsidy. It's a levy that has been collected and then it's being used to stabilize the market in terms of pricing.
But whether you look at it that way or not, it is still a subsidy because those gentlemen are getting more money than expected. Remember that if the price was not controlled, we'd probably be buying petrol at something like 150. So that money would be coming directly from us, not from the government. So it is still a subsidy. Personally, I'm not a supporter of subsidies.
The fertilizer subsidy.
And then they tell you to buy only 20 bags. So how is it helping farmers?
Okay.
And by the way, instead of having subsidies for fertilizer and having subsidies for petrol, why don't we let anybody who can import oil import it? Why don't we let anybody who can import fertilizer import it? And then we are going to have an oversupply of fertilizer, an oversupply of oil, and the prices will go down. Why should we liberalize an economy that years ago? Then we are still talking about price controls. Let the market do its work.
Is that not what the market has been doing when it comes to fertilizer?
Then why we have...
It's a free market,
Yes.
but now because of all these things that you've talked about, COVID, supply chain, disruptions because of the Ukraine war, the kind of inputs that go into making fertilizer coming from Russia and Ukraine, that affects the market for fertilizer.
But that is a short-term solution because can you imagine going to buy fertilizer? You need 1,000 bags of fertilizer. So you are told you can only buy 20. That's not fair economics. So that might be a short-term solution, but in the long term, let the market do its work.
What difference would it make if you're saying let the market do its work? Because I'm seeing something here that happens with, clearly, if we use this fertilizer issue, right, as an example, or even the petrol issue, two things that touch on the economy in huge ways.
That's true.
We've seen what has happened with fuel in the last 6 days, and things have almost come to a standstill. We've seen food prices increase. We've seen transport go through the roof. We've seen so many things happen just because that fuel issue was touched. Same thing with agriculture. Farmers are not able to purchase this fertilizer because it is too expensive. Then it affects the crop yield, and then we are told there's no food in the barns. Then we must import, etc., etc. What difference would it make if you're saying let the market then determine the prices? What difference would we see? Remove a fuel subsidy, remove agriculture subsidies, then you would get for fertilizer. How would things then change?
You know, we are using politics to solve an economic problem. And let me start with oil. Why should we be talking about high oil prices in this country when we are producing oil? Should we not be the people exporting oil? Imagine if Kenya was producing oil because we have it here. Then we would simply be saying, instead of exporting this oil, let's take it to the Kenyan market. And that would stabilize the prices. And that's my argument, that we are trying to solve a problem using the wrong solution. So let's go on with oil. Is a problem, see, people are arguing that by having subsidized oil, then everybody is benefiting. Because you are paying 130 instead of 150.
Right.
But who is paying the difference?
The person who's buying the fuel.
That is the problem. So how are you benefiting? You see, you might think that you're buying fuel at 130, but who is paying that subsidy? It is you and me. In fact, if you look at the pricing of oil, that subsidy that is being paid to the oil marketers is probably coming from your taxes. So you can see my distortion, that's the distortion I'm talking about. That at the end of the day, you think it's a subsidy, but somebody is paying for it. And there was another question you asked. It was not about oil, it was about what?
About fertilizer, for example.
Fertilizer.
What difference would it make?
Yes, a very interesting argument. I don't know whether you're a farmer.
Well,
You don't
I
look
have
like a
some
farmer.
super week in the backyard.
Every African is a farmer
I don't look like a farmer.
by design.
But if you have ever farmed, and I do a bit of farming, mostly tree farming, who said that fertilizer is the most important factor in food production?
It's what we hear that the cry is about.
Yes, but
all the time.
But it's only one of the many factors. Look at something like land subdivision. We have subdivided land from very big pieces to small pieces.
Yeah.
That has affected productivity. So it's not just fertilizer. It's also a question of land subdivision. How much technology do we use in land production? So I think we are bringing fertilizers. We are bringing oil prices for our own policy areas. And that's my simple argument, that we are looking at today when tomorrow is more important. So even if fertilizers came today and fertilizers started costing 1,000 a bag,
Or if Kenya began to manufacture its own fertilizers for its own farmers.
yes, do you think that will raise the productivity, will raise the amount of food in this country? Not significant. Because the other factors we must consider.
What would raise, and I'm sorry to interject, Prof, but what would then raise? Because if we're after quantity as well as quality of crop and et cetera, and the bane has always been fertilizer.
I think fertilizer has been used as a dustbin. As a person who interacts with the farmers every day, that's just an excuse. For example, why can't you use natural manure? Why can't you use crop rotation? Why must we focus so much on fertilizer? And remember, at the end of the day, fertilizer makes soil very tired or fatigued.
Yeah.
So let's look at more modern ways of producing food.
You sound like the people who are also saying that Kenyans ought to stop looking at things like ugali as the only thing to consume. And then when there is a maize shortage, then everybody is
Goes
in a bit of a
hungry.
mess. And there's hunger.
I totally agree with you. Who said you must eat ugali? The other day, somebody came visiting my house and we had a lot of food. We couldn't finish it. In fact, 50% of the food was not eaten. That around 10, that gentleman tells me in Swahili, kwani hapa hakuna chakula. So I think we need to start looking at things from one perspective. Let's be more open-minded. So fertilizer is an excuse. Oil price is an excuse. Let's look at the main issues, which is productivity in agriculture. Let's have land that is commercially viable in terms of where we can use tractors, where we can use machines. But now, land has been subdivided into very small pieces. If you drive around Nairobi, the best land in Nairobi is not put into agricultural use. Westlands and Upper Hill and so on. If I trees growing there, that's very good agricultural land. Let's shift to a place like Utawara. Let's move to Mombasa Road. Very dry place. We cannot put it to better use. Let's put
We
land.
leave Red Hill for crop
Yes,
production.
for crops and so on. The price of food will go down. I know you may not want to go there to Kitengela and so on because it's not very, very prestigious. You want to live in a suburb. But let's think about food security in this country. And let's stop bringing fertilizers.
Let's take a break. It's 7:30. We have in the studio Professor Iraki, who is an economic analyst and lecturer at the University of Nairobi. We are talking about tomorrow's budget speech by the Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani. What do we expect to see from the next financial year's budget? That's what we're having a conversation over. We'll be back shortly.
This is the Situation Room.
And our guest this morning, Professor Iraki, economic analyst and lecturer at the University of Nairobi. We are talking about the budget 2022-2023. It's going to be 3.31 trillion shillings. And tomorrow, Ukur Yatani will be in Parliament talking about how he hopes to finance the 3.3 trillion shillings expenditure by government for the next 12 years from July. Prof, you're talking about what we keep saying, subsidies, let's deal with it today. People don't have food on the table today. But you said this is exposing a failure in proper policy formulation and implementation. The last 4 years, we've been financing largely the Big Four agenda. And the CS for the National Treasury, both Rotich and Yatani, have been saying the Big Four agenda is this administration's key driver of development. One of the pillars of the Big Four agenda is food security. Now, Ukur Yatani has said we will continue financing the Big Four agenda. And if we look back at what has happened over the last 4 years, we have made a lot of progress in policy formulation, policy review, setting mechanisms in place to help us achieve all this. If we look at housing, there is a mortgage refinance corporation that has been established. If you look at healthcare, we have reviewed and revamped what's it called? NHIF. If you look at agriculture, then there's an economic agricultural sector growth strategy, the agricultural sector transformation and growth strategy, 2019 to 2029. Let me just read for you the 9 flagships of this strategy, which is being rolled out by the government. Flagship number 1, Anchor 1, to increase small-scale farmer, pastoralist and fisherfolk income. Anchor 2, to increase agricultural output and value addition. Anchor 3, to boost household food resilience. And the enablers, launching 3 skill programs for 200 government leaders, flagship implementers, 3,000 youth-led and digitally enabled extension agents. Flagship 8, strengthening research and innovation. Flagship 9, monitoring 2 key food system risks, that those addressing sustainability and climate, and a second category for crisis management for pests, diseases, global price stocks. If you look at it, that sounds holistic, like it's looking at how do we get this country into a food secure country. It's being implemented.
These are great ideas and no question about it, but they must trickle down to the grassroots. I'll give you a good example. When I was a young boy, I always used to see extension officers coming to help my dad improve his productivity. They taught him how to make silage for cattle so that the cattle can survive during the dry season. They taught him how to make furrows to stop soil erosion. And I want to hear how many people have seen an extension officer in their farm in the last 10 years. So these are great ideas, but great ideas must cascade to the grassroots. If you look at agriculture, it gives about 25% of the GDP. How much credit from banks go to that area? If you look at the same agriculture, how many students nowadays want to study agriculture in the university? They want to study other things.
As a first choice, right?
As a first choice. In fact, I would challenge you with your colleague here. If, today, and I'm going to give you a very good gift, if you can get me a business card with the title farmer. So funding is very important. We talk about it at the national level, but we don't really take it with the seriousness it deserves. Those policies are great, but let the people on the grassroots feel it. And if they do that, we are going to see security.
So does it mean that all the money that has gone into the Big Four agenda has been going to the wrong areas of the Big Four agenda?
Maybe it has not been going to the wrong area, but it has taken too long to arrive at the final destination. It's just like the money we talk about in devolution. A lot of money comes from the central government to the devolved units, but do we see the effect?
Sure.
Maybe that money goes to the devolved units, goes to agriculture, but not to where it matters most. And I'll give you an example of extension. I'll give you an example of preparing the next generation of farmers. If you look at young men today, who is going to farm tomorrow? They don't want to be farmers. If you go to other countries, people are very proud to be farmers. Here we are not. So I think we have the money, but we have not put it where it matters.
And interestingly enough, then farming contributes to agriculture, which we are saying is propping up the economy 30 to 40%. It's what is touted to. Now, if we look at the Big Four agenda, now in terms of the budget, every year since 2018, a significant amount of money from the budget has gone towards the Big Four. Now, the question is, even asking this question yesterday, is the output commensurate to the input then of funds? Now, going forward, should we say then it makes sense to see a reduction of that funding? Because clearly, nobody's really excited right now about the state of things. And when we're coming into a budget year, it would be prudent then of those who are in the process to say, hold on, folks, perhaps our attention should be focused somewhere else. Now, if the Big Four agenda has taken up quite a chunk of this money in the last 4 years, should we be looking forward and saying, let's focus on the 2 that are important and give some more attention to the things that have obviously been suffering for the last 12 months, 24 months?
That's a very politically rooted question, because the Big Four is a part of President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy. You have to remember this, that before we got the Big Four, we had Vision 2030. And the Big Four was derived from Vision 2030.
Right.
So we scaled the big things in Vision 2030 into Big Four. So you're now saying we move from Big Four to maybe the Big 2 or maybe the Big 1. And I'm worried because you soon say Big Nothing.
But
I think you have a very good argument that if something is not working, we need to do something about it.
Yeah.
So the big question is whether the next president, whether it is Raila Odinga or William Ruto, is going to stop funding Big Four. My hunch tells me that it might change when they come to power. But I see Big Four being funded in the current government as a part of policy projects, as a part of legacy. But I think the next president will probably change that. Under the current circumstances, I don't think it is changing.
Don't you think even the President Uhuru Kenyatta should just sit back and ask himself, so when I leave office and I say there was Big Four and those were my legacy projects, what is it that I can point and people can say, that was Uhuru's legacy and it was Big Four. They directly pointed that. We will have the expressway, for example.
I can point at the expressway from here.
The expressway will be direct. That is Uhuru's legacy, okay? But you show me manufacturing, housing, food security, healthcare. What is it that people will sit back and say, Nyewe, Uhuru moved us from this point to the other?
I think we need to be fair to President Uhuru. I'm not, I don't support Azimio, I don't support UDA, I'm a political observer. But you need to be fair. I think it is important you let other people judge you when you leave office. We did that with President Kibaki. We did that with President Arap Moi. We did that with Jomo Kenyatta. So I think let President Uhuru hand over the government to the next president. Then when he is out of the office, we can now say, this is your legacy. But I think your question still makes sense. Out of all that funding for those projects, what are the tangible results? You see, to Wanjiko and Kamau and Mwandoe and Onyango, they may not even read the budget tomorrow. They may not even know what the Big Four is. The question they'll be asking is, do I have money in the pocket? Can I feed my family? Can I pay my rent? And I think at the end of the day, the success of any project should be measured with those small things. Because that's what matters to me. The big ideas are good for academics and policy makers. For the ordinary mwananchi, it is what money is in my pocket. So I think it is too early to judge the success of Big Four, in my opinion, because government projects sometimes take a long time before we see the success. We bashed Thika Road. Now it is packed with cars. We bashed SGR. Now all of us are taking holiday at the coast. So I think sometimes as a politician, you have to take bold steps and let people in future judge your ideas and your projects. It is not always fair to let the current generation judge your success.
True, Prof. But there's always milestones. You know, you can see, yes, we are heading towards Mombasa. We are at least in Emali.
Yes.
And you can clearly see this is not where I started. I started in the Degua. This is Emali. It's different. But with the Big Four, would we be able to say that we have moved? These are the milestones that we've been able to achieve. And this, like you say, rightly, it should not necessarily be the president coming to say, this is where we started, this is where we are, but the others who should be doing that. The National Treasury, for example, should be reporting to Parliament and saying, when we started financing the Big Four in the first budget of 2018-2019, we put in X amount of money. This is what we have. And now we are building onto it. Parliament should be able to have a report that shows. But even the Parliamentary Budget Office keeps saying, we don't know what we are achieving with the Big Four. We cannot quantify and say this is what we've achieved.
And yet we keep
academia such as yourselves, Professor, you should be able to come back and say, you know what, we can clearly see this is a progress. I'm trying to pin you down to actually name one progress that you can say, we started here, we're here, and I'm not getting it.
I think you are deliberately trying to make me carry the burdens of this country and the burdens of all the academia.
Yes.
And I'll not do that because I can't do that. But let's be realistic. I think Big Four from its conception, derived from Vision 2030, was a great idea because you cannot do everything. So just do what you think is important. Even yourself, when you're at home or in your own home, you don't do everything.
Yep.
You come up with priority projects. I think the question we are debating is whether those were the right priority projects. In my opinion, healthcare is a good area to focus on because a healthy nation is a productive nation.
Indeed.
There's no question about that. What should be asking is whether it has been implemented the right way.
Yeah.
And my observation was the Big Four was not really debated enough. We would have had more feedback from the voters, from the citizens. So they say, this is why we think it matters most. When it comes to food security, we should also have been more involved so that we say, this is why it matters most in housing and all the other sectors. But this is where we are. We have put money into Big Four. The president will be leaving office in the next few months. And we are asking whether the next president will carry over from there. I think it's not very good to throw away projects halfway. My observation should be, let's finish what we set out to do, and then we set new priorities. Because if now we come with the next president and he starts his own projects and leave the Big Four unfinished, we are in deeper problems. And I'm not here to defend politicians because I'm not one. I'm here to defend common sense.
And I think...
And economic common sense.
I'd agree with you, Prof. Very many people have questioned whether the Big Four were the right priorities to focus on. And very many have said, if you look at food security, that's big. If you look at health, that's big. I mean, those are key burdens that Kenyans bear. If you look at housing, it's big, and that is futuristic. If you look at manufacturing, it's big because you're talking about job creation. My issue, though, is with the implementation. Have we been able, have we applied that shilling in the best way possible? Are we able to say that we put in money? We talked about this. There was a report that went, the budget policy statement goes to members of the National Assembly. The Committee on Budget and Implementation comes back and says, in fact, the Parliamentary Budget Office is telling us money went into some project. One of the flagship projects was supposed to be in Athi River, some tannery in Athi River. Money went into that tannery in Athi River. To date, there's no tannery in Athi River. Why? Because first they went and built in a swamp. It rained. They realized, oh my God.
Tannery sunk.
I think I tell you what the problem is. Some of you look very religious from your eyes. I'm not very sure about your religion. But we always say you cannot put new wine in old skins. And I think that's a mistake we made. We came up with big ideas, a big four. But did we change the infrastructure, our mental infrastructure, our political infrastructure, our social infrastructure to fit into the big four? I think that's the biggest mistake we made. For example, if you look at something like health, the core of health is people to pay little money, and when you pay 500 shillings, you are sure you can get help, you can be treated in any clinic or any hospital in this country.
Yes.
But as we are saying that, we are saying the health system is devolved. So if I'm from Kiambu and I'm going to another hospital in Tharaka Nithi, someone might say I'm not from there. So we need to have changed our social infrastructure, our management structure, our economic structure to take care of the big four. I don't think we did that. We are still implementing big four with the old mentality. I can also give another example of something like manufacturing. If you say this country should become a manufacturing nation, which I think is a good idea because manufacturing creates a lot of jobs, did we, for example, go to the universities and tell them we need manufacturing, so we need more graduates in engineering? So we need less people, for example, in social sciences, but more people in this area. So that by the time we set a factory, we are sure we can get engineers. We can get people who can design machines. We have people who can go and market those new products and improve the quality so that instead of demanding something from China or from Germany, you demand something from Kenya. If you go to housing, we said we want more housing, but are we using appropriate materials? I want to give you a very good example of where I grew up, and I'm not going to disclose for security reasons. But when Muzungu came there around 1940s and 30s, guess what he did? And you cannot believe this. He built houses using mud, and those houses are still intact. 100 years later. Now, when we build houses today, what do we use? Everyone must use blocks. Everyone must use iron sheets. Why do you use such expensive materials in a country like Kenya that is very, very warm? In fact, my argument has been we should use the cheapest material in this country. But guess why we build houses are expensive in this country? You cannot believe it's because of insecurity. If you improved security, I don't need that block wall. I don't need that metal gate. Housing will become very cheap. So if you look at all these big four, there is something we not do right. There's something we not do enough research about. And quote any of them, I'll tell you would have improved on this. So I think if we put deeper thought into the big four, they would have been cheaper to implement, would have been having more milestones, and would be much happier.
I mean, it's important to sound out these things. One thing that it worries me is in the language. I was even looking at the budget now. The language around the presentation of the budget worries me sometimes, especially when the cabinet secretary uses words like, we hope to get these funds from here or there. That means that as we currently speak and as I present this budget to you,
I don't know.
But,
neither do we have this money.
But one of the most important items you sell as a politician is hope.
Right. Now,
Just like preachers.
this is true. However, there are 47 million plus people hinged on this hope. And unfortunately, they will have to bear the brunt of this responsibility when it comes to the hope that the CS now is putting out there. Now, when you have a budget based on hope, for example, that means you're not sure, that you may not even have an inkling where this money will come from because you're currently in the doldrums. Governors are asking for 150 billion shillings today. You don't have enough money right now to feed your country's hungry. You are not able to pay oil marketers. You've paid them some money today, but come the 14th of April, we are going to go back to where we were yesterday. So even as you are preparing and forecasting for the next fiscal year, you are still in the pit. So when you're saying, I hope that this will happen and this money will come from where, I am worried and I am concerned. Should we be, and then should you budget with money that you do not have?
The way you ask that question give me an impression that you're a part-time preacher. You talk a lot of passion about hope and prospects. I think one of the biggest problems we have in this country is that sometimes we are not very realistic. And people need to be realistic. I cannot sell hope to my children, hope that I will pay school fees, hope that I will buy you clothes, hope that I will pay your rent. We should be realistic.
Yes.
But I think, remember, a budget to some extent is a political document. So you should not be so exact because we are going to pin you down.
Well, there must be something at least.
Yes,
though,
there
right?
must be something. But I think what we need to do in this, when it comes to budgeting, is to be very realistic. We say this is the money that we have. These are the needs that we have. And we must balance them. For example, why do we always have an unbalanced budget? We always have a deficit. And even I can tell you that the budget being read tomorrow, there will be a budget deficit. So why can't we be realistic and say, this is the money we have, this is what we can do,
Right.
instead of hope. But remember that as a politician, you cannot do that. You must tell
You must
people,
sell hope.
yes, you must sell hope. And it's not bad, because what is wrong with aspiring? It's good to be aspire. It's good to aspire. It's good to dream. Because some of those dreams turn into reality. But as an economist, I wish we are more realistic. I wish we came up with a budget that we can afford, that we can pay for.
Has there not been a budget deficit in the reading of the budget for the last 5 years?
Even tomorrow there will be.
Right.
I can guarantee you.
Yeah.
But the question is, where do we get the money to cover this budget deficit? And what I've found is that every government rolls over the budget to the next one. So that you borrow money, somebody will pay it. And we need to move. Maybe the parliament should come up with a new rule that budget must always be balanced. And not just at the national level, but at the county level, so that we live within our means.
What's to say then of a nation, for example, that needs to complete last year? Well, all right. So coming into budget 2021, the development partners had to give some money that then enabled the country to basically close the year because there was no money to do it. What's to say then of a nation that needs to get this donor support to be able to complete its own budget, its own national budget?
I think I want to turn that debate loud, that a budget is ours. We are the people who come up with it. We are the people who write it. We are the people who consult in parliament and elsewhere and come up with a budget. We even call for public participation.
Right.
So in view of that, a budget should be very realistic. And I think this country needs to become more proud so that we fund more of our budget. During Kibaki's era, we almost did that. But remember that to fund the budget, we need to pay more taxes. So maybe we need to be more patriotic so that we pay more taxes. We have more people put into tax bracket. We have less tax leakage. So that at the end of the day, we reduce the budget deficit. We are a very proud country. We are going to finish our projects. We are going to have more Kenyans being pulled from poverty. Okay, you may say that is hope, but it is good to be hopeful. So I believe we can do better than we are doing by being realistic. You know, he doesn't look very happy.
It didn't start the day well.
I don't know who has annoyed
I
him.
agree with you. What I want to conclude the conversation with is, it is quite telling that we haven't had much input from the Raila Odinga campaign or from the William Ruto campaign on what they hope to see in the budget. Rallying their troops. This is what we expect you to look out for from the speech, and this is what we'd like you to push the budget towards. Because they know it's either Raila or Ruto that's going to implement this budget.
That's a fact.
And that they are all quiet. It's like they're sitting there waiting for...
When it happens, we'll deal with it.
budget, tuambie unataka kuspend 3 trillion shillings, alafu sisi tutakuja tu...
If you remember when we were starting the debate, that's exactly what I said. I would like to see what is in the budget tomorrow and what's the input from UDA side and from Azimio side. Because whether we want or not, you are right. They are the people who implement it. And it surprises me that they're not putting input into what they will implement. Unless they know something I don't know, they should be the most vocal people.
Right
telling
now.
us this is not in the budget, this is in the budget.
Yep.
But remember, as a good politician, you don't say too much. we might be
Play
held
your cards close to your
Ah,
chest.
Yes,
You will be held account. Now
So-
you have something to blame it on. You see, I inherited a budget that could not have helped me do this.
I think that's the riba rate.
Prof, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Uh,
Let's watch this, and then we'll come back again soon to look at implementation of this budget.
We should have a very good conversation on Thursday.
Asante.
I will be the first person to read it from cover to cover
Uh-huh.
and tell you whether I should smile or frown
Or frown.
or both.
Sawa.
Have a very good morning.